July 25th, 1944. 09:37 hours. West of St. Lo, Normandy. The morning mist still clung to the hedgerows when General-Lieutenant Fritz Bayerlein, commanding Panzer Lehr division, observed through his field glasses that the American artillery had gone silent. After 6 weeks of constant harassment fire since D-Day, the sudden quiet felt more ominous than reassuring. Veterans of Rommel's Afrika Korps occupied positions along the Saint-Lô-Perriers road. They had faced Soviet artillery barrages that seemed to shake the earth itself. They had endured British artillery at El Alamein. Nothing in their experience prepared them for what would happen at 9:38. At that precise moment, over 1,000 American artillery pieces fired in coordination. Not in sequence, not in rolling barrages as military doctrine had prescribed for decades, but all at once. The shells, fired from different distances, some from 6 miles away, others from 15, had been calculated to arrive at exactly the same instant. Light 105mm howitzers, medium 155mm guns, heavy 8-inch howitzers, and massive 240mm batteries all contributed to a single devastating moment of impact. The mathematical precision required for this feat would have seemed impossible to artillery officers of any previous war. Each battery had calculated not just range and deflection, but time of flight. A 105mm shell fired at high angle might take 23 seconds to reach its target. A 155mm long Tom firing from farther back might require 31 seconds. The fire commands had been staggered backwards from the moment of impact, each battery firing at precisely the calculated second to ensure unified arrival. What the German defenders were about to experience was not just an artillery barrage, but a demonstration of American industrial coordination and mathematical precision applied to the science of warfare, a synthesis of technology, communication, and organizational capability that would shatter not just German defensive positions, but their fundamental understanding of how wars were fought. To understand the revolutionary nature of time on target, one must first comprehend the state of artillery doctrine in 1944. For centuries, artillery had followed predictable patterns. Napoleon's Grande batteries massed guns to fire in sequence. World War I's rolling barrages walked ahead of infantry at predetermined rates. The Germans had perfected their own doctrine of concentrated fire, Schwerpunkt, focusing overwhelming force at decisive points. German artillery doctrine, refined through victories in Poland, France, and the early stages of the Russian campaign, emphasized rapid concentration and displacement. German forward observers, working closely with battery commanders, could bring accurate fire on targets within minutes. The Wehrmacht prided itself on this flexibility and speed. The assessment of German artillery superiority wasn't entirely wrong based on early encounters. American artillery in North Africa had initially struggled with coordination. At Kasserine Pass, dispersed batteries had failed to concentrate their fire effectively. But German officers had missed something crucial. The Americans were learning, adapting, and applying industrial management principles to the ancient art of artillery. The development of time on target represented a fundamental shift in thinking. Rather than seeing artillery as individual batteries supporting local units, American planners conceived of artillery as a system, a coordinated network that could deliver overwhelming force at precise moments. The ability to execute time-on-target barrages required 4 interconnected technological and organizational innovations that the Germans had not fully grasped. First came the forward observer system. Unlike German vorgeschobener Beobachter, who typically worked with single batteries, American forward observers could call upon entire artillery groups, even corps-level assets. Each FO carried SCR-619 radios, later upgraded to SCR-610s, providing reliable communication to fire direction centres miles behind the lines. The SCR-619, documented in Technical Manual 11-619 from April 1945, operated on FM frequencies between 27 and 3738.9 MHz. The SCR-610, standardized on September 29, 1941, provided 20 to 32 watts output with a reliable 5-mile range. The second innovation was the Fire Direction Center, FDC, a concept pioneered at Fort Sill in the 1930s and perfected in combat. The FDC was essentially a mathematical calculating center where trained personnel used firing tables, slide rules, and graphical firing boards to compute firing solutions for multiple batteries concurrently. The third element was communication infrastructure. The Americans laid telephone wire with almost manic intensity. A single infantry division might lay 3,000 miles of telephone wire in a month of combat. These redundant communication networks ensured that fire missions could be transmitted instantly to dozens of batteries. The fourth and most underappreciated element was standardization. American ammunition was manufactured to exacting specifications in factories from Pennsylvania to California. A 105mm shell fired from any howitzer would have predictable ballistic characteristics. German ammunition, increasingly produced by slave labor in dispersed facilities, the German army first encountered limited time on target techniques in Italy during early 1944, though many dismissed these as lucky coincidences rather than deliberate tactics. The concentrated firepower achieved during the Anzio breakout on May 23, 1944, provided the first large-scale demonstration that gained German attention. 16 battalions of artillery, over 200 guns, delivered coordinated fire on German positions along the Caesar line. The technique had been refined through months of practice. The 9th Infantry Division had conducted experimental TOT barrages in Sicily. The 1st Infantry Division had improved the technique in Italy. By D-Day, TOT was becoming standard doctrine, though German intelligence had dismissed early reports as exaggeration. July 25, 1944, marked the beginning of Operation Cobra and the full unveiling of American time-on-target capabilities. General Omar Bradley had concentrated the largest artillery force yet assembled by the U.S. Army in Europe. Over 1,000 tubes ranging from 105mm howitzers to 8-inch guns, with 522 guns from the 7th and 8th Corps alone, supplemented by 4.2-inch mortars and tank destroyers firing as artillery. The target area, a rectangle roughly 7,000 yards wide and 2,500 yards deep south of the Saint-Lô-Perrier Road, contained the bulk of Panzer Lehr Division and elements of the 5th Fallschirmjäger Division, approximately 5,000 combat troops in fortified positions. At 9:38, following the carpet bombing by heavy bombers that had already stunned the defenders, every American gun fired. The shells, launched from distances ranging from 5,000 to 25,000 yards, converged on their targets in a coordinated moment of destruction. The U.S. Army had allocated 170,000 artillery shells for Operation Cobra, 140,000 for 7th Corps, and 27,000 for 8th Corps, a staggering concentration of firepower. The barrage lasted in precise intervals, successive time-on-target concentrations walking through the German positions. Then silence. Then the American infantry advanced. Panzer Lehr, which had entered Normandy with 14,000 men and 190 tanks, essentially ceased to exist as a coherent division. General Fritz Bayerlein reported to Field Marshal von Kluge his famous assessment, "My front lines look like the face of the moon, and at least 70% of my troops are out of action, dead, wounded, crazed or numbed." What the Germans couldn't fully comprehend was the mathematical precision underlying time on target. This wasn't simply about firing many guns. It was about solving complex ballistic equations in real time. Consider the problem. To make shells from different guns arrive together requires knowing the exact location of each battery, the precise distance to the target, the muzzle velocity of each gun type, the weight and aerodynamic characteristics of each shell type, wind speed and direction at various altitudes, air temperature and density, the rotation of the earth for long-range fire, and powder temperature affecting muzzle velocity. The Americans had developed graphical computation tools, the graphical firing table, GFT, and the graphical sight table, GST, that allowed rapid calculation of these complex problems. German artillery, still relying on conventional firing tables and individual battery calculations, couldn't match this speed. The ability to execute time on target depended on a communication network that dwarfed anything the Germans had encountered. By July 1944, a typical American infantry division in Normandy operated more radio sets than an entire German corps possessed in 1940. The 1st Infantry Division alone operated over 900 radio sets by August 1944. Every artillery battery had multiple redundant communication systems, wire, radio, and messenger. Fire direction centres maintained direct lines to every battery, every forward observer, and higher headquarters. This communication superiority enabled something the Germans found almost incomprehensible: the ability to mass dispersed artillery instantly. American batteries didn't need to be physically concentrated to achieve concentrated effect. Guns spread over 20 miles of front could deliver their shells to a single point concurrently. What German officers slowly began to understand was that time on target represented not just a tactical innovation, but a manifestation of American industrial organizational capability applied to warfare. The standardization that made TOT possible extended throughout American military production. Every 105mm howitzer, whether manufactured by Rock Island Arsenal or Watervliet Arsenal, had identical ballistic characteristics. Every shell, whether produced in Pennsylvania or Missouri, met exact specifications. This standardization, achieved through mass production techniques, enabled the precise calculations required for TOT. German production, increasingly disrupted by bombing and reliant on dispersed manufacturing using slave labour, couldn't achieve such consistency. The American ability to mass produce not just weapons but trained personnel astounded German professionals. The US Army's Fire Direction Center training program at Fort Sill, the primary artillery training center, graduated thousands of qualified FDC personnel throughout the war. The German counter-offensive at Mortain, launched August 7, 1944, provided a devastating demonstration of American TOT capabilities in defensive operations. Hitler had ordered a massive counterattack to cut off the American breakthrough, committing the rebuilt 2nd SS Panzer Division, 1st SS Panzer Division, and 116th Panzer Division. As German armour concentrated for the attack, American forward observers watched from Hill 317. When the German assault began at midnight, they called for TOT missions on pre-registered coordinates. The 2nd Infantry Division alone fired up to 20 TOTS a night, according to official after-action reports from Hill 192. The American 30th Infantry Division, though outnumbered, called in TOT missions from 7 separate artillery battalions throughout the night. Each mission delivered instantaneous devastation on German assembly areas, approach routes, and command posts. The concentrated firepower created what German survivors described as solid walls of hot steel that made advance impossible. By dawn, the German attack had stalled. Field Marshal von Kluge reported to Hitler that continuation of the offensive was impossible against such artillery superiority. The ability to execute TOT missions routinely represented a remarkable training achievement. The US Army had transformed millions of civilians into skilled practitioners of complex military science in less than 3 years. At Fort Sill, the Field Artillery School had developed an intensive program that compressed decades of artillery science into 17 weeks. Students learned ballistics, meteorology, survey techniques, and communications. But most importantly, they learned to think of artillery as an integrated system rather than individual guns. The training emphasized practical application over theory. Students performed thousands of simulated fire missions, calculating TOT solutions until the process became automatic. By graduation, a competent FDC team could calculate a 10-battery TOT mission in under 180 seconds. This mass production of technical expertise astounded German professionals who encountered it. The Americans trained more fire direction specialists in 3 years than Germany had produced in decades, approaching military education like factory production, standardized, efficient, scalable. The execution of time on target required not just skill, but overwhelming material resources. A single TOT mission might expend more ammunition than a German division received in a month. During Operation Cobra alone, American artillery fired over 170,000 rounds allocated for the operation. The logistical system delivered thousands of tons of ammunition daily to the front. Trucks ran continuously from Normandy beaches to battery positions, creating an unbroken chain of supply. The quality of American ammunition also surpassed German expectations. Each shell was manufactured to exacting tolerances, with consistent propellant quality and precise weight distribution. This standardization enabled the accurate time-of-flight calculations essential for TOT. German ammunition, by contrast, showed increasing variability as production dispersed and quality control deteriorated. German artillery officers had to test-fire new ammunition batches to determine actual velocity and range, while Americans could assume their shells would perform exactly to specification. One aspect of time on target that particularly impressed German artillery officers was the American mastery of meteorological effects on ballistics. Accurate TOT required precise knowledge of wind speeds at various altitudes, air pressure, temperature, and humidity. The Americans had deployed an extensive meteorological service. Every corps had weather sections taking readings every 30 minutes. Radio sondes, weather balloons with radio transmitters, provided atmospheric data up to 30,000 feet. This information was immediately distributed to all fire direction centers. This attention to atmospheric conditions enabled American artillery to maintain accuracy even in rapidly changing weather. During the November offensive in the Hürtgen Forest, American TOT missions maintained precision despite fog, rain, and variable winds that would have disrupted German artillery. The Battle of Hürtgen Forest demonstrated that time on target could be devastatingly effective even in dense woodland that Germans had considered artillery-proof. The Americans developed tree-burst TOT missions, timing shells to detonate in the forest canopy. In November 1944, the 4th Infantry Division attacking through the forest called for TOT missions, using a mixture of high-explosive and white phosphorus shells. The coordinated tree bursts created what survivors described as instant hell. Wood splinters driven downward like spears, mixed with burning phosphorus that ignited the forest floor. The 28th Infantry Division, attacking toward Schmidt, used TOT barrages to clear German strongpoints in the woods. One concentrated mission on November 6th involved 12 battalions firing into a 500-metre square area, delivering over 3,000 shells in 30 seconds. German positions that had held for weeks were obliterated in half a minute. The dense woods muffled sound, so shells arrived with even less warning than in open terrain. German medical services documented unprecedented rates of what they termed artillery-induced trauma among Hürtgen veterans, soldiers who remained functional after conventional bombardments but were psychologically broken by the coordinated devastation of TOT in the forest. The encirclement of German forces in the Falaise pocket in August 1944 provided the most concentrated demonstration of time on target's effectiveness. As German units struggled to escape through the narrowing gap, American artillery delivered continuous TOT missions on the escape routes. On August 17th alone, American artillery executed documented TOT missions on the Falaise-Argentan road at 30-minute intervals throughout daylight hours. Each mission involved 10 to 15 batteries, delivering coordinated devastation on German columns attempting to flee. General Hans Eberbach, commanding the remnants of Panzer Group West, reported, "The concentrated artillery fire was so intense that it was impossible to bring up reserves or evacuate the wounded." vehicle movement became suicide. The road through Falaise became known as the Corridor of Death. Destroyed vehicles, dead horses, and abandoned equipment created obstacles that slowed movement, making subsequent units even more vulnerable to TOT strikes. By August 21st, when the pocket finally closed, 50,000 German soldiers had been captured and 10,000 killed, with artillery accounting for the majority of casualties. As German forces retreated toward the Seine in late August, they discovered that even river crossings offered no respite from TOT barrages. American forward observers had infiltrated ahead of their main forces, establishing positions overlooking every potential crossing site. At Vernon, Rouen and Mortain, German attempts to establish pontoon bridges were met with immediate TOT responses. The precision was such that bridges were destroyed while still under construction, often with engineer units still working on them. The systematic destruction of crossing attempts through precisely timed artillery demonstrated the technique's flexibility. Units began refusing to cross in daylight, creating massive traffic jams on the western banks that became targets for additional TOT missions. By December 1944, the Americans had integrated new technologies that made time on target even more devastating. The VT, variable time fuse, known as the proximity fuse, was first used in ground artillery during the Battle of the Bulge in December 1944. These fuses detonated shells at optimal height above ground for maximum fragment dispersion. When VT-fused shells were incorporated into TOT barrages from December 1944 onward, the lethality increased dramatically. Shells detonating at optimal height created a uniform pattern of destruction that no foxhole or slit trench could protect against. Over 22 million proximity fuses were produced during the war, transforming artillery effectiveness in the conflict's final months. The Germans initially believed the Americans had developed a new type of weapon. Intelligence reports speculated about controlled aerial mines or time-delay cluster munitions. The truth, that it was simply precise timing combined with proximity fuses, seemed too simple for such devastating effect. As American forces approached the Siegfried Line in September 1944, German commanders believed their fortifications would finally provide protection from TOT barrages. The concrete bunkers and steel cupolas had been designed to withstand sustained artillery bombardment. The Americans developed specialized TOT missions for attacking fortifications. By combining instant impact high-explosive shells with delayed fuse armor-piercing projectiles, they achieved surface explosions and penetrating impacts in unified strikes. At Geilenkirchen in November, the 84th Infantry Division faced extensive Siegfried Line fortifications. The attacking units called for a TOT mission from 12 battalions, 144 guns, firing a mixture of ammunition types. During the German Ardennes offensive in December 1944, time on target proved its defensive value. Though initially caught off guard, American artillery units quickly recovered and began delivering TOT missions on German spearheads. On December 19th, as the 2nd Panzer Division approached Dinant, forward observers from the 3rd Armoured Division called for emergency TOT support. Within 4 minutes, 8 battalions had calculated firing solutions. The resulting barrage caught the German column in march formation, destroying the lead battalion within 60 seconds. The ability to mass fires quickly through TOT proved crucial in containing German penetrations. At Bastogne, surrounded American forces called for TOT missions danger close to their own positions, devastating German assault formations attempting to breach the perimeter. As American forces approached the Rhine in March 1945, time on target reached its zenith of destructive capability. The crossing operations were supported by massive artillery concentrations using TOT principles. At the Wesel crossing on March 24, 1945, the Allies concentrated 4,000 guns, with 2,070 American pieces participating. The opening bombardment lasted 4 hours, with coordinated TOT strikes at 15-minute intervals. Each strike involved hundreds of guns achieving unified impact across kilometre-wide target areas. The scale was unprecedented. In preparation for the crossing, American artillery fired over 65,000 tons of ammunition in March 1945 alone. German defenders reported that the bombardment was so intense that the concussion alone caused casualties, with soldiers found dead without any visible wounds. At Oppenheim, where Patton's Third Army crossed on March 22nd, the supporting TOT barrage involved 33 battalions, over 400 guns, firing in perfect coordination. The barrage lasted 60 seconds and delivered 10,000 shells onto German positions. German commanders reported that entire battalions simply ceased to exist, with no survivors to even report what had happened. What German officers gradually recognized was that time on target represented the application of American industrial methods to warfare. The same principles that enabled Detroit to produce a bomber every hour enabled American artillery to coordinate hundreds of guns. This industrial approach extended beyond the battlefield. American factories produced artillery shells in staggering quantities, over 8 million rounds monthly by late 1944. The transportation system delivered these shells from ports to firing batteries in a continuous flow. Communication networks coordinated this vast enterprise with business-like efficiency. The psychological trauma inflicted by time on target extended far beyond immediate casualties. German medical services documented unprecedented rates of combat neurosis, specifically linked to coordinated bombardment. Veterans who had endured hours-long Soviet barrages on the Eastern Front were broken by 30-second TOT bombardments. The instantaneous nature removed all psychological coping mechanisms soldiers had developed. There was no escalation to prepare mentally, no rhythm to anticipate, no pattern to recognize. German field hospitals reported that soldiers experiencing multiple TOT barrages exhibited unique symptoms: paralysis triggered by sudden sounds, inability to process multiple stimuli, profound fear of synchronicity itself. Unlike traditional shell shock, which might improve with rest, these symptoms persisted even after evacuation to rear areas. Fritz Bayerlein's assessment became the most quoted German description. My front lines look like the face of the moon, and at least 70% of my troops are out of action, dead, wounded, crazed or numbed. All my forward tanks have been knocked out, and the roads are practically impassable. General Hans Eberbach provided crucial testimony. The fire curtain was so dense that it was impossible to bring up reserves or to evacuate the wounded. The Americans have developed a system of artillery concentration that exceeds anything we imagined possible. Captured documents from Wehrmacht headquarters revealed desperate attempts to counter American TOT capabilities. A weapons testing office report concluded, American coordinated fire technique represents technological superiority in computational devices and communication integration. No effective countermeasure exists with current German capabilities. German attempts to replicate TOT techniques revealed systemic disadvantages. They understood the mathematics and could calculate time of flight, but lacked everything else: standardized ammunition, reliable communications, trained personnel, and the industrial foundation that made American coordinated fire possible. German attempts at coordinated fire typically involved no more than 3 or 4 batteries and achieved only approximate simultaneity. The largest German attempt during the Nordwind offensive in January 1945 involved 8 batteries but achieved impact dispersion over 12 seconds, far from American precision. As American forces drove into Germany in early 1945, time-on-target barrages became routine preliminary to any attack. At Cologne, the garrison commander surrendered after experiencing a single 60-second TOT barrage on March 5th, reporting that further resistance was militarily pointless against such artillery superiority. The pattern repeated across the collapsing Reich. Commanders who had fought tenaciously for years capitulated after brief TOT bombardments. The psychological effect had become so pronounced that often the mere threat of coordinated fire prompted surrender. Soviet observers studied American time-on-target techniques with intense interest. The British, despite being allies, were equally impressed. Field Marshal Montgomery wrote in his memoirs, "American time on target demonstrated that warfare had become a matter of industrial and organizational superiority. Traditional military virtues, courage, discipline, tactical skill, became secondary to systematic application of overwhelming firepower." The German experience fundamentally influenced post-war military thinking. When the Bundeswehr was established in 1955, coordinated fires capability became a primary requirement for its artillery force, explicitly citing wartime experience with American TOT. The French École de Guerre revised its artillery curriculum based on German accounts. The Israeli Defense Forces, established in 1948, incorporated TOT principles from the beginning, advised by Jewish American veterans who had served in artillery units. NATO doctrine explicitly incorporated TOT principles, viewing coordinated fires as essential for defeating numerically superior Warsaw Pact forces. General Johannes Steinhoff, Luftwaffe fighter ace who later served as NATO Military Committee chairman, stated in 1968, "The lesson of American time on target is clear. Qualitative superiority in synchronization and coordination can defeat quantitative superiority in men and equipment." The computational methods developed for time on target laid groundwork for modern military technologies. The graphical firing tables and rapid calculation methods pioneered by American artillery units presaged computerized fire control systems. The story of German forces encountering American time-on-target artillery marks a pivotal moment in military history, the transformation of warfare from an art practiced by warriors into a science executed by systems. German soldiers, products of the world's most professional military tradition, found themselves overwhelmed not by superior soldiers but by superior systems. The thunder that arrived without warning in Normandy represented more than American firepower. It embodied the emergence of a new form of warfare, where victory belonged to those who could best organize and apply industrial power to military problems. The German Wehrmacht was defeated not by better soldiers, but by better systems, not by superior courage, but by superior coordination, not by tactical brilliance, but by industrial efficiency, applied with mathematical precision to the ancient art of artillery. American time on target shattered the entire conceptual framework of traditional military thinking. The coordinated thunder that fell on German positions in 1944–45 announced the arrival of a new age in warfare, where victory would belong to those who could best transform military operations into industrial processes. The echoes of that thunder still resonate in military doctrine worldwide. Every modern artillery system, every networked military force, every coordinated military operation owes something to the revolution that American time on target represented. The German soldiers who experienced it were witnesses to the birth of a new age in human conflict, where industrial mathematics would prove more powerful than martial tradition. In the age of industrial warfare, organization triumphs over courage, systems defeat soldiers, and coordinated time conquers all. The Germans learned this lesson under the instant, overwhelming thunder of American industrial warfare made manifest in perfectly coordinated artillery fire, a lesson that transformed warfare forever.